Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us here in the room. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about AI-powered employee retention and the path that we've been on at Amerit Fleet Solutions to get better and faster at knowing what's important to our employees and how to look at all the diverse data that we have in our enterprise to understand signals coming out of that data as to what might lead to this individual to depart the organization. And can we learn that fast enough that we can intervene and prevent that turnover? So why don't we go to the introduction slide? You can be the clicker.
Sure.
Oh, one more. That's us.
All right.
All right, I'm Jason Stout, AVP of HR Operations at Amerit Fleet Solutions. And with me today is Zach Reimold, who is our...
I'm the Senior Director of Business Intelligence for Amerit.
And we have the good fortune of, by far, the most fun data scientist in all of Domo.
Well, there's not that many of us, but yeah. Are you afraid to say my name? Just kidding. I'm Flo Silveira. Hi, everyone. I'm a data scientist at Domo.
So why don't we talk about Amerit Fleet? Amerit Fleet Solutions is probably not a name that you recognize on a regular basis if you're not in transportation and logistics. But I'll tell you that we are servicing the vehicles that you see on the road every single day. If you look at the size of the businesses, and now with the, since January, we've added vector fleet management. So this is growing our overall portfolio very quickly so that we can deliver custom solutions across many different asset classes for large and complex fleets. You can see it's 300,000 vehicles that we're maintaining on the Amerit side and more on the Vector side, where they have some really specialized services around heavy industrial equipment that's used in mining. 14 years experience at Amerit Fleet Solutions, and our friends at Vector have been in business for 36 years. We run 24/7 operations, and it's not just the maintenance of the vehicles, it's also how do you get the parts and how do you do that efficiently and maintain those inventories. So all in all, it's about 1,800 service locations in total, and that really is part of the picture of why it's complicated when we think about retention and how do we effectively work with a workforce that's so diversely spread out across the country.
Thank you, Jason. So what we wanted to look at, we're mainly looking at our billable employees, which are mainly our technicians that are doing the work on the trucks or whatever equipment that they're servicing. So we wanted to build something that was going to be able to, like Jason said, flag employees that are at a high risk of turning over, and then HR would take over in terms of actioning that to reach out to those employees and see if they can prevent that from happening. So we worked with Domo to build out a analytic project for using the data that we had in Domo, as well as lots of new data we brought in and lots of new data that we discussed, that we tried to bring in or just discussed, hey, would this be worth it? So we started off with the conceptual work, and it starts with this kind of timeline. This is our actual timeline from when we started to when we went live in July, and then there's a little bit of support time there at the end. And you can see the largest phase is the prepare phase. And this was the phase that my team was most heavily involved and doing most of the groundwork. We were working directly with Domo. They were sharing their expertise on what we should be looking for and providing us tips and tricks. But we were responsible for making sure the data was clean and in a prepared format for them to then take over some of the more more complicated processes down the line from a data science perspective. Forgot that was going to get highlighted, so that's the longest phase. So the first step was looking at a conceptual model, and this is just thinking of everything we could possibly think of that could impact our employee turnover. Now, these buckets are more specific to our work as technicians, so that's not like anything set in stone. It was just kind of how we bucketed up the different metrics. And we had many, many more metrics than this. I think I have it in my notes. We had something like 75 plus metrics, and I think it might have even been higher than that, that we just kind of threw like, hey, we know we have this data, or this would be cool if we could capture this. And we worked with the business, with Jason and other members in HR, as well as other members from other departments, to conceptualize what what could be impacting our technician from turning over. So this is not something where you would necessarily just want your data team to be doing because they're not going to have that operational knowledge of what could be impacting. Now, some of it's pretty obvious, pay, bonuses, and hours that they're working, but a lot of it is not, depending on what you're looking at. So we wanted to make sure we were involving the business in those decisions. And then one thing to note is some of the metrics can be straightforward, but some of them can be broken out into many different ways. So pay could be, what's their hourly rate. It could also be how long since their last raise and things of that nature. So there's different ways that an individual metric can be broken down into many different factors. I talked about incorporating the business context and the importance of that. We also wanted to make sure we were aligning with the business goals. We didn't want to create this project just to have it roll out and no one use it or question the data that's going into it. By involving them throughout the process, they gained trust that we were working in their favor. It also got them excited about the project. We showed them throughout as well, pulling them into the conceptual process as well as we reached different points along the process, as we learned things, even before the model was ready, we were still able to say, hey, here's some cool things we've learned that Jason's team presented on, these things we know are impacting turnover that we might not have realized, or how much they're impacting turnover more so than we might have realized, positive and negative. So we presented that kind of throughout the project to keep the stakeholders interested and to make sure they understood kind of what we were working on. It also showed you that long timeline. It was important for us to make sure the executives understood that this was going to take a while. There's a lot of pressure for data teams to turn over things quickly and show the return on investment quickly. So we wanted to keep them involved so that they knew, like, hey, we are making progress, and it just takes time. Next thing after the conceptual model was breaking out now into the metric map. So we took all of those 75 plus metrics and we listed them out just in an Excel file, nothing fancy. Just, here's the name of the metric we're trying to get. Is it available? So that could be, it's already in Domo. Maybe it's something, it's in our system somewhere, but we didn't have it in Domo yet. Could be some pie in the sky thing that we want to try to capture. So we tried looking at things like census information, environmental information that we weren't necessarily capturing. So we wanted to list that all out here. Obviously, if it's in Domo or you're going to be adding it, then where is it? The data set it's used. The variable name, so that could be the name of the actual field, or it could be the calculation, breaking down how you're calculating that metric. How often it's updating. Some of our stuff was only updating once a month, weekly, daily, whatever it is. So it's just making sure everyone's aware of that. And then any notes or comments. So this is more, sometimes it's just things to keep in mind, reasons why you made certain decisions on metrics. So that way, if someone questions you, you can look back and say, hey, we didn't include the environmental data because we decided it wasn't worth the time and trouble and that type of thing. Also, I didn't list it here, but also status we eventually added as we started building out the process. So once it was available and it was added to our metric, we would put that in as that is now available and things of that nature. We split the work between myself and another analyst on the team. She did a lot of the heavy lifting of the data that was already in Domo, and then I concentrated on getting some of the additional metrics into Domo, and then she would take it from there. Then we get into the data preparation. So now we know what we're looking for. We've broken down where to find it. We're still, kind of an ongoing process while we're building out the model. We're still adding new metrics, so it's not just one at a time. But these are just some important things when you're looking, and obviously some of this is pretty straightforward if you've worked in data. Obviously, data quality, garbage in, garbage out. I'm sure we're all sick of hearing that, but it's still true. If your data that you're feeding into your model is not clean, then the model, even though it might still have some predictions, but it's going to be less accurate or misleading. Challenges you face, and this can be for different reasons, depending on the systems and how old your company is and things of that nature. Missing values, outliers, and duplicates. This can especially be an issue when we've switched systems over the years. So like when Amerit was first a baby 14 years ago, they were had one process and one system, where now we've kind of upgraded that and made changes, and it doesn't always align historically. So there's some things like that that you have to kind of keep in mind. And it's also important to involve the business in some of these discussions. Jason was in almost every meeting with us, with the Domo team, discussing some of these data challenges. And there were some things where it was data related and my team had to fix it. And there was sometimes a reason there was an outlier, that maybe there was something going on at that time in the company that we weren't aware of, but the data is clean, but it was still an outlier that we had to account for. So it is still important to involve the business throughout. And then just some basics on cleaning the data, standardizing your key fields. So employee ID was our way of tying that all together. So we had sometimes where the employee ID was an integer, sometimes it was text, sometimes leading zero, sometimes not, things of that nature. So we're just making sure that we're standardizing. Lots of data validation. So Domo team helped us with this as well as us doing our own validation. But building out lots and lots of different reports to break down your data flow, and Brian in the back give them a high five on your way out. And then regularly auditing the data. And this is before the model, during the model, and after. We still are looking at the metrics that are feeding into the model, as well as the output from the model to make sure it makes sense. We've had more changes, more system changes since we've gone live, and we've had to go back and make changes to make sure the data is still clean in the model without having to necessarily rebuild the whole model. We've added things like new job codes because we've picked up new customers with different types of vehicles, and we have to tie those into the current model. So it's just kind of making sure that as you get that new data, you're kind of keeping this in the back of your mind of how it could impact the model that you've built out. So I talked about the prepare phase being the longest, and you can see that there is an overlap between the prepare phase and the analyze phase. So as we're building out the clean model or the clean pipeline that's going to feed into the model, we're starting to do that EDA and break it down. And we still might be adding things. And I forgot to say earlier, you might think of new metrics that weren't on your original conceptual work, and you can still add them in as you're going. That first work is just kind of to brainstorm as much as possible. So the important thing here is that the analyze phase is going on at the same time, and that when you're looking at it from, I mentioned some of the historical data, making sure that the information makes sense. So you're, what did I forget? I didn't write it in my notes, so I forgot exactly what there's one more thing I think in my draft I forgot to put in here, so I apologize. But there's new metrics that we started to capture as a company that didn't go back very far. So we had our mood survey that our technicians do on a weekly basis, where they just rate kind of a happy, neutral, sad. And we wanted to make sure that was included in the data, but it only went back a year or two wise when comparing to the 14 years of data we had for other metrics. So we had to kind of measure the importance of that versus all the historical data and make the best decision for the business. So historical data might have provided a slightly more accurate model, but it wouldn't have been incorporating kind of the quick turnaround that we can get when a technician says they're sad, that we want to see that in the model quicker, not just the historical data. And then I mentioned some of the challenges, historical data from biases, inconsistencies, gaps, and changes in processes and systems over time. And then just wanted to show, this is just a small screenshot of the mini map from Domo, just to show you the final pipeline that was feeding into the model. So all these little dots are a magic ETL tile, and most of these are, especially when you focus on the ones at the bottom, they're following a very similar process. It's the input data set. It's some of the logic changes and group bys that we had to do in order to get it to then join to the model and do that for each. So just shows you, a lot of work does go into that. And obviously, the more data you have, the more that you'll need there. What we focused on was looking at it from a monthly perspective. So we needed to make sure we were building this out for one record per employee per month for each metric. So all those little tiles, as it's highlighted there, is just building it in that way. So you can see here for one employee, we have the different changes for each month. Their tenure is going up 1 month at a time, and that's just another kind of one of those EDA things to make sure logically the metrics are increasing or decreasing as you would expect. And then some of the metrics won't change very often. Pay rate is only going to change usually, unless you're getting a promotion. You get your annual review. It only changes once a year, and then it's the same throughout. So again, making sure things of that make sense. Yeah, I think that's about it. And then this was just a small example for any of the data nerds in the audience, which I'm guessing is most of us, because we're all at a data conference. This is just an example of how we broke out some of the metrics into the monthly views. So something like pay rate, again, that only changes once a year, but we still need to have that one record per month. So we have a similar logic for most of our metrics, where we're joining it to the calendar table, which is already kind of filtered to one record per month. We're grouping the data in a certain way to be able to join it to that. So this is kind of numbers, joining it to the calendar, filtering it to make sure it's only within the month. Again, that might depend on the metric you're looking at. Sometimes it's pretty straightforward. Sometimes you need a filter like this where you're only seeing the data within the defined time frame. Doing a rank and window function to kind of arrange it in case you do get duplicates. We've had things like there was a manager got laid off, and there was an interim manager, and then a new manager by the end of the month. So there was multiple manager changes. We only wanted the last one. We didn't necessarily care. There were certain metrics we looked at how many times things changed, but in terms of who their manager was at the end type of thing, we only want that one record at the end. So that's a way of just making sure you're not having those duplicates in there. Filtering to row number 1, so that's just based on the rank and window, and then finally joining it to the larger data set based on employee ID and month. Now I'll turn it over to Flo on the EDA.
Excellent. All right. So, can I come over?
Yeah.
Thank you. They had so much data. Amerit Fleet had so much data. We went through the conceptual model. I think it really was over 75 different features that we looked at. And so we had to find a way before we got to the modeling phase of figuring out what is actually related to turnover, right? We have a lot of theories. We have a lot of hypotheses around how different predictors behave, and we just need to confirm those. And so that's what the EDA seeks to do. And we kind of treat the EDA, we as in like the data science team at Domo.AI Labs, rebranded, as kind of like a funneling opportunity for features. We follow steps to identify which features are related to the outcome, in this case, turnover, and that's what we go into the modeling phase with. So we start with exploring hypotheses, right? There are things that we just assume are related to turnover. And I think I have a, I'm gonna go down here. Can you still see me okay down here? Okay. No? Okay, I thought I was taller than I actually am. Just kidding. So over here, we have the relationship between tenure and turnover rate. And the bar just represents the percent of employees likely to turn over in the next 3 years. And this is anonymized data, so pictures are fine. But what you'll see here is that the turnover rate among employees who are under 6 months in their tenure is much higher than the more than 2 years bucket. And there's a very clear linear relationship, right? We see something similar with age, where the younger population is more likely to turn over. But over here at the end, this is the 50 to 64 group in the green, and the 65, that one kind of messes with us a little bit, right? It's not perfectly linear. Makes sense. People retire. That's why we have a higher turnover rate in that group. But we need to be aware of these things in order to engineer our features to be well represented in an equation. I'll just highlight maybe this one because the mood data is so cool. And it's so unique, and it was so predictive of turnover. And so if an employee identified that they were ever sad in the previous month, they were twice as likely to turn over than if they didn't. They also have some really cool touch point data that kind of just tracks if an employee had any sort of engagement with the engagement team. And they also have a higher rate of turnover. But that makes sense, right? Because if you're intervening in the first place, there's a reason for it. And so we had to be mindful of this type of behavior as we went into the modeling phase. So we explore hypotheses visually first. Everyone likes to see charts. Domo's great at making charts. But then we started going into statistical significance. We have all these visualizations in which we think we see differences. What is not due to chance? That is essentially what statistical significance is trying to determine. Are these differences real if we look at the population, right? You don't need to pay attention to the numbers, but we sifted through so many of these tables on calls with Amerit Fleet. We created so many different features. We created different versions of the same features, and we narrowed it down again to see which features were still important and related to the outcome. And so in this chart, we have whether or not something is related to turnover determined by statistical significance. This is a summary view of all the tables that we went through. We have the size of their relationship when we look at it just individually. So if we look at, did they get a pay raise in a given month and turnover as the outcome? Is there a relationship when we just look at those two things combined? But we knew that tenure really mattered. Tenure had the highest or the strongest coefficient in our analysis. And so we were like, what if we hold tenure constant? What if we assume that everybody has the same tenure? What still matters after we do that, right? So it's just a way for us to confirm that a lot of these factors are not just representing tenure. Something like, you know, the rate at which you increase your pay rate could be related to tenure. Your age could be related to tenure. So we wanted to isolate, some of these things. And so that's what we have here. I did it again. Okay, user error. So this is, we built so many of these tables. We went through so many of these in conversations internally and with Amerit Fleet to go into the modeling phase with a set of features that we felt confident mattered. And then we got into the really fun part of modeling. And with modeling, as a data science team, we are very much open-minded in terms of what models are we going to test out. We don't want to decide on an algorithm and only test that one out. How many of you have experience with modeling? Okay, quite a few of you. Great. So we start with base predictive models as like, let's consider everything. What can we automatically strike out just because it's not a good fit? We knew multivariate forecasting wasn't a good fit because of the outcome we're looking at, right? Neural networks and support vector machines were just not a good fit because we felt, Amerit Fleet felt really strongly about interpretability. You wanted to know what levers mattered, what factors predicted turnover. And so we decided to try the other ones. We went for the tree routes, and we went for some more basic regressions. And for those of you who are not familiar with the modeling process, it's mostly done by software. The data scientist just knows how to use the software. And so we took all the historical data that Zach put together, and we split it. We split it into training data and testing data. And the training data, we just feed into the statistical software, and the software just like learns all the relationships in the data. It learns what the patterns are when we consider these three components together, and it knows the effect of tenure on turnover. And it creates a custom equation for us. And this custom equation then becomes your model. And with the testing data, which is also historical, so we know the outcomes for the historical data, we apply that custom equation to our testing data. And then, because we have the predictions for the testing data and we have the real outcomes, because again, it's historical, we can evaluate the accuracy of our prediction. And so we did this. We ran, Brian, how many? Probably like 200 models. Good number. Yeah, it was a lot of models. We did try out different parameters. We did all the things that you can do with a model. And we had a lot of conversations with the Amerit Fleet to decide which model should be implemented for their pipeline. Because it's not always about what model has the highest accuracy. There are other things to consider. And so there were some questions that were really important for the use case that should influence the decision-making process around the selection of the model. For example, for Amerit Fleet, bandwidth could change month over month in terms of the engagement that they could have with employees at risk. And so the question of how many employees can you intervene with in a month was really important. We wanted to have a way to rank employees in order to know how to intervene with them. what are you planning to do to intervene? What predictors are essential to include? So Zach, you mentioned that you had the mood data starting in 2023. The mood data was such a strong predictor of turnover that it was actually worth it to only look back a year and a half as opposed to 6 years because we had this mood data. And so these are the things that you have to consider. We could have gone back to 2018 for our training data, and our training data would have been much bigger, but we would have missed out on this predictor that was really powerful for our model. How frequently do you want a new list of predictions? This determined the version of the outcome that we used. We could predict, are they going to turn over next month, or in the next 3 months, or in the next 6 months? What's a reasonable turnover flag rate? This goes to the accuracy, right? We don't want people falling through the cracks. It's very expensive. And so it makes sense for us to sacrifice a little bit of accuracy to make sure that we are flagging the people that are at risk. Will feature importance be relevant? This goes back to interpretability. Yes. They absolutely wanted to know what were the drivers of turnover. And then how much lead time do you want for intervention? Going back to that question of what should the outcome look like? And we went through rounds and rounds of conversations to answer these questions, and they were partially informed by data and EDA, but they were very much influenced by business logic and business preferences and how you were planning on using the solution. So that's the nerdy part from me. I'll hand it back to Jason.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Flo. Speaking of nerdy parts here, am I the only HR person in the room? Can I get just one more? Yeah, oh, look at this. Yeah. So glad you're here with me. I appreciate it. A lot of you probably have had similar experiences to myself in that you've been for many years doing annual engagement surveys. Right? They come out once a year, they're a big deal, you spend weeks or months getting ready for them, they spit out huge reports, and then everyone sort of scratches their head for a little while. Well, that was a problem for our business. We need that kind of information, but speed also really matters to us. And Flo and Zach have talked a little bit about some of the things that we put in motion a little while back over the course of the last couple of years, including that mood survey, which is a once-a-week forced choice that our technicians make when they go to submit their time card. And it's as simple as happy, sad, neutral. And I was really skeptical at first, like, are people gonna do this every week? Is it gonna be meaningful, or are they just gonna like get me past this dang screen? I'm trying to submit my time card. But it has been consistent. And because we actually interface with the data, we have a team of engagement specialists that are looking at the people that are changing their mood week over week, calling them, trying to find out what's led to that change, hearing the stories and interacting with the individuals. The data stays really steady. And as Flo talked about, really predictive for our overall turnover. So that really helped us. We also put Domo forms into use so that we could create sort of like a CRM for our engagement team so that they could track their interactions with the employees like you would with a customer. So we know, when did we talk to them last? What did they talk to us about? How can we follow up? Is there something that we need to do that maybe another team needs to be involved in? We also have another source of data in an online recognition solution. It's a core value for us that we want to recognize good work. And because we're distributed over 1,800 different locations, an online solution works. And our technicians really enjoy and appreciate the opportunity to be recognized on the platform. That data is also meaningful. We know some really interesting stuff, like those that are recognized more frequently are more likely to stay and more likely to be engaged. And then you got your basic HR stuff, right? You got time, attendance, pay, all that information. And we need to be able to process that much faster so that we know where to turn our attention. Because I always loved that data and I would work with it independently, and that was me with Excel writing bad calculations that would create all sorts of crashes and stuff. And then at the end of the day, I'd have like basically one idea that I could prove or disprove from a hypothesis standpoint. But with the power of Domo and the data we have there, as well as with the AI that we've added onto it, the speed's so much faster. We're learning so much quicker what it is that matters. And then the big picture, right? Getting the overlay between the operational data around productivity, repair orders, everything that matters to our business outcomes, being able to map that over to individuals and the performance and the mood and engagement of those folks, getting all new information about what matters in terms of outcomes. And finally, the idea of measuring results leads to being really entrepreneurial with this engagement enterprise that we've set out with, and doing experiments. Like, let's not just always do the same thing. Let's have a month where, just for example, we send Sundays to everyone in the Southeast. And let's measure the difference in outcomes in the Southeast versus our control groups. And now we're getting that data really back so that we understand, oh, hey, that worked, or great idea, but it doesn't seem to have made any sort of a difference for our business. And then, all right, let's take all the information. Like Flo talked about, one of the things that we had to consider is how much can we work with on a regular basis. And because our model predicts the likelihood of an individual leaving within the next 3 months, we wanted to make sure that we had a list. We settled on 200, it could have been 400 or 500, whatever it was, of this is the top area that you focus on. And we wanted to execute well on that, and if it works well, then we can grow it. Let's start looking at the next 200. And what we focused on to get it into that real world, and I include this picture of one of our technicians because it's something that I always try to think about when I'm in the data, is that it's a real person who's going home and telling a story about their day and their work experience, either to their friends, their family, or their loved ones. And how does that matter? And so some of the big stuff that we're seeing coming out of this work is we need to focus on that onboarding experience. Flo talked about how our first 6 months are sort of the danger zone for us. And we've got new efforts underway that build off of that information so we can invest more heavily in onboarding. Productivity changes. I thought it was really interesting. We can now see, is there suddenly a dip, and is there an association with leave that an individual is taking? Or is it related to something in the business model, in the way that the trucks are being moved or put into a different lot and they need to access it in a different way? And I was intrigued. The purchase orders. We always hear, oh, it's hard to get a part, or I want this, or whatever. I was surprised. Sometimes there were theories we had that this is going to be really meaningful or impactful. We looked at the average time to fulfill a purchase order for a technician, and we saw really no relationship to their turnover rates. So that was not a point of frustration that, although we'd hear it anecdotally, wasn't boiling up to the outcome that we were most concerned about. And then I like to tell the story about the small stuff too, and the moments that matter. And this $30 fan, I could have put a whole bunch of text screenshots up there, but at the end of the day, it was just the idea of, if you got the signals as to who's in stress, the solution might be really simple. And this individual was a hard case who was very discontent in his work. We talked to him, we started engaging. We figured out that it was hot in the break room near where he liked to sit. We added a $30 fan, which we sent with a nice note attached to it, and just absolutely turned him 180 degrees. Totally bought in, and really describes it as a different kind of work experience than he's had in the past. And I already mentioned that the frequent recognition can cut turnover in half. So we're getting near our time. Why don't we go to the last slide? I'll talk about looking ahead, and I'll also try to make sure that we're saving a little bit of time for Q&A. So I've got that Deming cycle up there on the page because that's the way we want to think about this project. And we're going into the model retraining. Actually, Flo's already done some of the retraining work and already has improvements in the overall predictability of our next prediction of 200 that will come out next month, right? And We mentioned using Domo Forms, kind of like a CRM. One of the things we learned we needed to do was get more precise information so that it was a little bit less open text about this is what we're doing, and force it into some data that we can use to measure, hey, this is the intervention that really worked under these circumstances, versus other interventions that sounded good, but they just didn't work. And then we'll run a campaign schedule in 2025 to do that thing like we talked about, which is maybe this is Ice Cream Sunday month, and maybe the next month is something very different. Let's see which of these things work, and let's build on those. And then ultimately continue to iterate and build out on those cycles. So with that, I will open for questions.
Yeah, Sky will be the runner for Q&A. There we go. So it's official. I honestly can't see with the light.
Yeah.
There's one right here and then one over there.
Hi, I was just wondering, you talked about using AI in this entire process. Was it more during the modeling, or was it on the Amerit side, or how exactly did the AI benefit this entire process?
Yeah. So this one's on the AI track because it's predictive AI, which like everyone's talking about generative AI right now. And as part of AI Labs, generative AI is super cool. But this was more on the prediction side. Yeah. There's one over there.
Do you guys have a way that you calculate the cost of turnover, and have you seen any benefits in the overall cost of turnover to your organization after this program?
Yes. The cost of turnover is very big to us. Every single organization uses their own number. We have a fixed dollar number that we use, and we're net positive on the return from this. I didn't include it. It was one of my speaking points, but in 2024, we had 78 individuals that we uniquely saved from leaving the business as a result of knowing that that's who we needed to talk to and having some information about how to work with them. So 78 times whatever metric your business might like to use gives you a sense of the savings.
So in regards to like how you're talking and describing turnover, I'm curious if anything has come up on the side of like modeling out like staffing levels. In regards to turnover tends to be overworked. It's a big indicator I've seen in my past, but just curious if this has led into other opportunities of other models that may come to place of like units of service and how it might relate to, when we find the demand increases, just curious if there's been other models that have come of it from it.
Yeah, so we have discussed some future models, one of which is capacity forecasting, and then relating that back to, okay, how many technicians do we need to handle that? And then also keeping in mind, there is a certain hour, they want overtime, but they don't want too much overtime. So kind of keeping track of that to where, hey, maybe we need to put an additional tech here, or maybe he only needs to be there once a week or something along those lines. Some of that is still in the works.
I can say from like the data side, we just looked at this for the retraining, and we wanted to play around with the feature engineering around how many hours did they average a week, and we found a very clear linear relationship between hours worked and retention, which I was kind of surprised by because I assumed burnout would be a thing, but at least for your data, it's people like to work there. Good work.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
And then we are about at time, so last questions we can answer outside.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.